Hi everyone. Today I'll be reporting on a remote perception experiment I set up and managed with the aid of amateur remote viewers enlisted right here online. This is not your usual remote viewing session review. It's about an experiment I felt a need to do, and I have some interesting data to share. Additionally, there was a mental journey involved, and I'll be explaining the curiosities that led to this experiment and some procedural things I learned along the way. I believe these will be educational, especially if you're thinking about running a remote viewing experiment yourself. I'll be describing my thoughts and takeaways realized as they occurred. The best place to start is going back a few years after I had taken my first course in remote viewing and proved to myself that it worked. I started to review my old practice sessions. Originally done on paper, I scanned them all and created a large PC document archive. Every one of these sessions I considered a little self-contained psychic perception experiment. Looking over them all, the one question that kept coming to my mind was, how was all of this working? How was my mind or subconscious communicating accurate remote perception data with such apparent ease? Remote viewers are never told what they're supposed to perceive. They actually have no clue, no information about the target, an event, person, thing, or location. The only information a remote viewer does have is a target reference number, usually 8 digits long, a number that references a real paper or digital document containing the same number and describing the remote viewing mission you're about to be sent on. Somehow, given that number, you're able to psychically perceive and accurately describe the assigned target. It was the target reference numbers and those scribbles you did after writing down the target number that kept attracting my attention. How were these scribbles helping? These ideograms. I was taught that an ideogram was a short scribble, a pen mark made without thinking, something you'd later poke at or trace over with your pen tip to get perceptions, ideas about the target you were supposed to be perceiving. It seemed to work. One evening, I accidentally discovered something curious going over my old sessions. Let me explain. In the TDS remote viewing format I learned from John Vivanco, your session header page concludes with a full-page scribble, like the one shown here. I think the basic idea was to establish a little bit of mind clearing, letting your mind wander while scribbling before you started your remote viewing perceptions on the next page. For every one of these practice sessions, I also created a companion text document because I wanted to analyze my sessions. And later, I included a picture of the assigned target when I was told what it was. And some months later, I noticed this. There was a surprising similarity between my session header scribble and the photo of the target event. This whale jump. On closer inspection, my scribble even seemed to contain elements of the splash water. And the whale, all drawn as one continuous line in less than 2 seconds. Whoa! Was this just a one-time thing? Going back to my archive, I saw my session on the atomic cannon. Again, my header scribble contained what arguably was similar to the atomic smoke plume. It wasn't artistic, but for a quick scribble, it did indicate some sort of visual communication. So then I turned the notion around. I looked at this scribble. What could that possibly mean? Now, take a look at this photo. President Nixon's resignation speech. This was the target event, with the big man himself standing at the podium saying his farewells. His wife, Pat Nixon, behind him. And this was all drawn in less than 2 seconds. And what was really blowing my mind was this was all drawn before I started my actual remote viewing on the next page. Did you notice his hand leaning on the right? So I had become aware of this scribbled phenomena, but largely ignored it until one day I saw Daz Smith draw a big loopy ideogram on TV. As I stared at it, it seemed to have visual content, and I stopped the video and traced over his ideogram in the air. The perceptions I wrote down were surprisingly accurate. Was I just tapping into his psyche, reading his mind? Is that how I got my data? Or did the ideogram itself contain the data? Were we both simply drawing perceptions from data embedded in the line? Or was the ideogram more like a symbolic reference to the target? Whatever the reason, I seemed to be interpreting his ideogram correctly. Could anybody do that? Could you interpret my ideograms correctly? Could I interpret yours? On June 29th, 2023, I posted this experimental proposal on the Remote Viewers and Remote Viewing Facebook group. Basically, I wanted to collect a few voluntary practicing remote viewers as participants to see if they could interpret each other's ideograms. The exact details needed to be worked out, and I had some vague ideas about collecting data, making spreadsheets, and drawing a few conclusions. I got positive responses on this. People sent me their email addresses, and so I launched my ideogram experiment. So now let's take a look at some of the ground rules. First of all, there would be no target reference numbers delivered to the participants. Instead, we would create targets using photos of household objects, then create scribbled ideograms for each one, and those would be sent to and used by others for remote viewing. Someone suggested that all ideogram be created for blind targets. A blind target is a target where you yourself don't know what it is. And this seemed like a good idea. And if you're creating multiple targets at home, you could simply shuffle them in PC folders before you created your ideogram for each one. Remote viewing sessions could then be any length, ranging from stage 2, 3, and beyond. Sketches, if provided, were allowable. All sessions and target data would need to be sent back to me in JPEG or PDF form. And finally, viewers could work on as many targets as they wanted, but to participate, you had to work on at least one. Almost before we got started, some of the people had to drop out because they were busy or had other personal reasons. I also hoped we'd all create targets for each other, and that didn't happen either. It seemed people were just too busy to create targets, so in the end I created almost all of the targets, shuffled them, created a single ideogram for each one, and sent those to the participants in this PDF document. There was one concerning detail at this point. When I created the ideograms for my shuffled targets, I did them in rapid succession, one after another, spending no more than 1 minute for all 11. I found myself feeling confused. I'd never drawn more than one ideogram at a time, and now I had just done 11 in a row. Because I felt confused, I considered discarding them all and redoing them more slowly, with maybe a 5-minute interval between each one. Hey, I don't know how ideograms work, but if I felt confused creating them, would that confusion be passed on to the participants? This was, after all, a psychic effort. And this experiment was being driven by my scribbled ideograms. I finally decided, you know what, let's just see. Let's see what happens. Let's see if the participants feel confused or the remote viewing sessions show poor target contact. This might be another interesting aspect of the experiment. This was the first moment I felt confused. It might have been nothing. Still, I was concerned about it. So, after I sent my ideograms to the participants and waited for them to send me back their remote viewing work, I did my own remote viewing sessions for my shuffle targets. And just like everyone else, I only used my ideogram for target reference. My sessions were a fast 2 pages long. So that's when I started to wonder, would my memory of creating these targets give me some sort of statistical advantage doing remote viewing on my own shuffled targets? This, I realized, might be another interesting possibility to investigate. Now, remember at the beginning I showed you how my scribbles and ideograms sometimes contained hints or clues about the target? While I was waiting to get session feedback from my participants, I wondered whether my ideograms had any visual clues, like the ones I showed you before. Suppose they did. Would participants pick up on those clues? Another experimental possibility. Well, now that the experiment is over and I'm reviewing everything with you, we can investigate that notion right now. I've got a little audience participation thing for you here. I'm going to show you 3 of my ideograms and 3 targets from my target pool. See if you can match the ideogram with the target. You can stop the video if you want. Otherwise, you have 20 seconds starting now. Okay, time's up. If you picked ideogram A and the second target, the guitar, you'd be right. Now, notice how the guitar head here looks similar to the bottom of that ideogram. And did you see the tuning peg-like loop at the lower right? Interesting. Let's go to the next one. Target B goes with ideogram C, the colorful aroma taste chart for remote viewers. Now here, notice that the ideogram starts out with a flowery, artistic design, sort of like a brush tip that's sliding, applying, or rolling itself onto a curled, flat surface. Interesting. Next one. Ideogram C goes with the first target, the 3D printed lampstand. Now let me show you the target reveal video I had for that target. Watch carefully. Okay, this might be hard to recognize, but look how I annotated my ideogram in my own remote viewing session. A curvy motion, moving around with energy applied to a point, like a 3D nozzle, creating a layered structure. This was the only time I actually named the target in my 11 sessions. So it doesn't look like I had much of a statistical advantage. Now let's try this again. 20 seconds. Match the ideogram to the target. Go. Okay, here's the first one. Ideogram A goes with target 2, the door key and keychain. Now this ideogram seems to represent, at least to my mind, something flying into your hand and palm. Notice the thumb and palm shape, and whatever it is, it's coming from over there on the left side, then directed in front of you. Fascinating. The next ideogram, ideogram B, goes with target 1, the Coca-Cola advertisement. Can you see this one? There are 3 C's in Coca-Cola, drawn in a flowery font with a long initial underline, and has a pointed focus aimed at something leaning casually. To be honest, I've never seen this sort of font style hint before. Interesting. And ideogram C matches the third target, the PC mouse. I believe the ideogram here indicates a rapid hand-arm motion going back and forth, then left to rest. So, are you getting a feel for this now? We now know my project ideograms contained embedded subconscious hints. What did we just see again? An expression of arm movements. In the case of the PC mouse, well, that would be body motion. Something moving into your hand and directed forward. The keychain. That would be motion plus human physiology, your hand. And finally, the artistic representation in the Coke font logo. In this case, indicating alphabetic letters in a flowery, artistic sense. Now that we've seen this phenomena, the question that comes to my mind is, would the participants pick up on these subliminal clues? Yet another possible data contributor to this experiment. So, okay, finally we get to the results, and I'm pretty stoked to see what happened. Here's my questions. Would the viewers make target contact through my ideograms? How would I measure the results? Would target contact convey any confused feelings? Would viewers perceive any hints or greater clarity from my ideograms? Would there be any value to this experiment at all? And if so, would there be any major takeaways? Okay, we go to the spreadsheets. These might seem complicated, but I'll try to explain things so you fully understand what's going on. And by the way, I didn't know exactly what I was doing when I did this. I felt my way through it all. So maybe there's something educational here too. I started off by collecting session data by target, everybody's first target, then the second target, and that's down here in these individual tabs. Viewers are symbolically identified by their initials, here and here. While only a few people were involved in this project, there were a lot of remote viewing sessions collected, too many to actually discuss. Fortunately, almost all of the viewers did the first target, the 3D printed lampstand, since that produced the most data, and since more data is always good, I'll be focusing on this in this presentation. Every word the viewer submitted in their remote viewing I placed in one of 4 categories: a strong match, a mild match, a weak match, and no match at all, what remote viewers call a displacement. I also kept track of items labeled as analytic overlays, AOLs, essentially guesswork. You need a strategy for classifying data, and here's the one I used. A strong match was something that matched the target well or with uniqueness. A mild match matched the target in a less obvious way, less helpful to identify. A weak match were vague correspondences, or perhaps things near the target physically. Let's take a closer look at viewer OD's data now. This target was the white lampstand. As you can see from the picture and the video I showed earlier, curvy down, loopy, slanted, angled were all strong perceptions. Further down, highlighted in yellow, I included her analytic overlay of a 3D printer. Even though this was not the named target object, the printer appeared in my target reveal video, so I awarded extra points for that. Let me tell you right now, it was very difficult to get the perceptions in the right columns because there were so many gray areas, words that could have gone in one way or the other, repetitions that included additional but different words. So there's no doubt mistakes were made. But on the whole, I think I did reasonably well. You'll also see data highlighted in gold in a few places, like here. These were data from people using the CRV format, sections A and B, where you describe in words the ideogram. Some of these data actually describes the target pretty well, an interesting curiosity. How am I going to summarize all of this? I counted the number of elements in each column, strong, mild, weak, and so on, and put those into this summary sheet. I did this for everyone. All target A sessions appearing here, then target B, and so on. Now I needed to analyze this somehow. I assigned different point values to each column. A strong match got 3 points, a mild match 2 points, a weak match 1, and displacements -3. Arbitrarily chosen values, yes, but these actually worked out pretty well. And this was a spreadsheet after all, so they can be easily changed. The value for displacements, -3, that was tricky. How do you deal with data that's completely off target? I came up with this scenario. Suppose you gave your session data to somebody and they had to use it to find the target in the target pool. Let's say the target is the color red, and your data indicated it's red and black. Well, the erroneous perception of black adds confusion. What is it, red or black? If I awarded 3 points for the correct perception of red, a value of -3 for the erroneous color black would produce a net effect of 0, and that seemed close to being right to me. So I went with that. The columns now, to the right, show all the computed sums. First, the sum of all your point-gaining perceptions, then subtracting the displacements. And that column I called your score value. And I sorted these, highest to lowest. So here's the moment of truth. Is this data telling us anything? Look at the top 4 scores. Viewer OD got a score of 86 points from 43 perceptions. Viewer JW got 66 points from 26 perceptions. A high score, but with fewer perceptions. Aha, my first takeaway. The remote viewers are hitting the target well from my ideograms. Excellent. Continuing on. Viewer DD scored 55 points from 22 perceptions. Still a high score, but with half the number of perceptions as viewer OD. Another realization here. You can still have a relatively high score with fewer perceptions if your perceptions appear in the stronger point-gaining categories. Fairly intuitive observation, but still worth acknowledging. And viewer DRK scored 26 points from 61 perceptions, the highest number of perceptions here, pulling a comparatively low score. What's going on here? It was her displacements that killed her score. Without those subtracted, her score was actually quite high. So, seems like here's another takeaway. Displacements are strongly confusing. Actually, this viewer failed to declare run-on fantasies as AOLs, and this is exactly what Puthoff and Targ discovered back in the 70s. When their psychics eliminated the guesswork from their data, their accuracy improved from below 20% to over 60%, if I recall correctly. So this is educational. I guess the takeaway here is if you think you know what the target is, list it as an AOL. Now, here's a surprise. Viewer MA, and let's quickly jump to her perceptions. None of her data matched the white lampstand. Definitely bio, trouble situation, depression, cell or DNA destruction, from thoughts or events received, and so on. None of these were describing the white lampstand, so I initially placed them all in the displacement column. Until, lying in bed one night, I realized her data was talking about me. I had a problematic cataract operation several months earlier, and viewer MA picked up on that. But I wasn't thinking about that when I photographed the lampstand video. I moved all her data into the weak but nearby category because I was obviously near the lampstand when I shot the video. What's going on? This is an interesting takeaway. Viewers bring something to the table, which I think it's sort of like a filter. Viewer MA is a healer and interested in animal and physical health. She interpreted my ideogram from her point of view, her interests, and I think that's profoundly interesting. Excellent. Now, here's another surprise. I got this email from viewer DRK.
His ideogram seemed to speak to me differently than mine. Subtle indicators like the bump and the line in ideogram 3. I seem to be more clear on these ideograms than my own.
Wow, at least one person in the group reported greater clarity for my ideograms. An interesting realization. She called it clarity. But for my list of takeaways, let's just say there can be visual clues in your ideograms, and you saw this yourself earlier. I'm almost tempted to say an ideogram is like a multidimensional art form. There's more to it than initially meets the eye. Now, moving on, I started looking at this, the number of perceptions column here. Look at the disparity. 43 perceptions on the high end versus only 9 by these viewers. I started to realize these numbers represented their effort in a way, their duration of focus. If you divide each viewer's perception score by their number of perceptions, the highest number you could get would be 3. That would occur if you had every single perception in the strong category. I realized if I multiplied that number by 33.33%, we could get a percentage in the range of 100% or less, and that would be easier to deal with than fractional values of 3. So this would be like a perception accuracy value, and another way we can analyze the data. When we focus on viewer perception accuracy, viewer JW and DD came out on top this time. Taking a quick look at viewer JW's perceptions, she got most of her data in the strong column and no displacements, earning the highest perception accuracy rating for this target of 84.5%. And by looking at these accuracy ratings here, this answers another one of my questions. Did my ideograms created while feeling confused affect the viewers? Well, apparently not, with accuracy ratings like these. And I had this other initial theory about ideograms. Did remote viewing perceptions, did the data come from the line itself? Or was the ideogram more like a reference to the target? like the 8-digit target reference number we're all used to. How do you even answer a question like that? Were any viewers getting strong perceptions just by describing my ideogram? They did. Remember the CRV section AB data I showed you earlier? Those words were written to describe their ideogram, and when I realized those same words were also describing the target, I highlighted them. For this ideogram and the lampstand, loop, sharp angle, loop and angle, curvy down, slanted, angled. For the guitar, elongated, curved, gradual. The guitar neck has graduated frets. Swinging. The guitar swings on its guitar strap when played. I find this sort of amazing. It seems there is real value in describing an ideogram in words, which is actually taught in both the CRV and TDS remote viewing methodologies. Loops around a loop, rounded area, circles back. There are circles on the back of this watch, and there's more of this. Don't you get the feeling now that an ideogram is more like a Picasso painting? It's more than what you see at first glance. It's more than just a line or scribble. Can I finally answer the question I asked at the beginning of this project? Could the data in an ideogram be correctly interpreted by any remote viewer? Well, if I look at the top 10 accuracy scores across all 11 targets, I'm seeing accuracies in the 89 to 61% range, which is a fairly strong indication of good remote viewing. And I think a lot of my other goals were achieved too, including building that list of takeaways. And speaking of takeaways, while I was in London for the Future RV conference, I met remote viewer OD, Oana Dimitropol, the highest scoring remote viewer in this experiment, and also met the highest perception average remote viewer, JW, Gemma Warner. And I awarded these souvenir personalized 3D printed key fobs. The grand prize went to viewer DRK. While her scores and averages needed improvement, she probably learned the most from this experience. She was also the only viewer that did all 11 of the targets, and she sent many helpful emails to me, including this detailed session-by-session report. I'll tell you, you need focused people like this in an experiment. And she was fully engaged, and in my opinion, that made her most valuable. So in addition to the key fob, I also sent her this stained glass-like 3D printed window. I learned how to make these things on my printer, and they're beautiful in the sunlight. Someone mentioned to me at the beginning, give me a target ID or ideogram, you're going to get the same data. Is that right? That may be true, but I've never seen it discussed or tested anywhere, so this experiment is perhaps a little baby step forward. But it's a real step, and maybe there's some spin-off ideas in here for future projects too. So in the world of engineering product development where I come from, they say you have to build something 3 times. The first time just to figure out how to do it, and the second time you do it, and the third time you do it right. Well, this then was an experiment to learn how to do an experiment, and hopefully I'll do it better next time. We had good fun, and I hope this was educational. Thank you for watching.